Mize, pediatric speech-language pathologist, and welcome to Teach Me to Talk's podcast. We're continuing with part 6 of an 8-part series, building verbal imitation skills in late toddlers. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite levels, but I think I say that with all of them, but I do love this approach. One of my favorite levels, which is teach me to imitate verbal routines. So what in the world is a verbal routine? Well, I'm going to tell you exactly what it is and start out with our 4 most important points that I want you to remember about verbal routines. During verbal routines, a child learns how to imitate real words. So this gets very exciting for parents of late talkers because we start to hear words. But the kicker is we only hear the word when it's tied to a really specific context. Let's take the classic example. Ready, set, and you knew what came next, right? What comes next is go. And that becomes automatic speech for a kid. And so he hears that verbal routine long enough that he begins to join in and he begins to insert that word almost before you or he even recognize that he is doing that. So this is something that we know happens with children, and so we can take advantage of that. And so again, this is one of the reasons this approach really, really works. And I'm so excited to share that with you today. Now, before we go forward with the other 3 important points about verbal routines, I want to direct your attention to the handout for this course. You get this when you purchase CE credit for therapists for $10 a show in this particular series. So if you are interested in getting that handout so you can follow along, the link is right there below the YouTube post. All right, let's get back in our content here. What's the second most important thing that I can teach you about verbal routines? The second one is that repetition, predictability, and time are the 3 most important variables to have success with a verbal routine. So repetition, what does that mean? We're going to do it over and over and over. And again, that's the word there, routine. We make it part of a child's routine so that he can hear it. And that leads us to that second factor, which was what? Do you remember? Is predictability. So can he learn what word comes next? Will his brain just predict it again? Will he expect it? And so that's that second factor. And the third factor is time. That means that you have to give it some time. You've got to be repetitive enough and predictable enough, meaning that you say a lot of the same things, and we'll talk about how to construct a really effective verbal routine. But the third part of this is really important. You can't expect a child to join in with verbal routines the first time or two until he's heard it several times. Now, later in this course, I'll introduce you to a little boy who learned some verbal routines pretty quickly, and we'll kind of talk about why that probably happened. But for the most part, especially under 3, when kids aren't really very verbal yet, when they're late talkers under 3, we know that we have to give them some time to be able to kind of catch up and for their brains to really learn the routine and remember the routine, and then again send that little word to their mouths almost before they are again even expecting it. So that was the second important point about verbal routines. The third point, this one's really important too, and it all has to do with setup. This is expectant waiting increases the likelihood that a child will begin to fill in the blank with a word or two that he says on his own as a part of verbal routines. So what's expectant waiting? I'm going to tell you and show you later in the course, but for now, let's just kind of talk about it. Expectant meaning that you expect something to happen while you're waiting. So you're not just waiting on the child to respond. You are giving him as many visual cues as you can, in that your face looks excited and you are leaning forward. Your whole body language really communicates to him like, it's your turn. It's your turn to talk. And that can really go a long way with late talkers. And so from this point forward, particularly with verbal routines and on into our next 2 levels, with functional words and short phrases, we will really use expectant waiting. And again, it's a really, really powerful technique. So we'll talk about that further as we go. And then the fourth most important thing that I can teach you about verbal routines is a benefit. It's that when we use that predictable sequence of words and events in play, meaning that we do the same things over and over and over, it really increases the child's staying power so that he wants to be with you rather than run away. So for some of you, when I say that, you think, run away, what's she talking about? Because the child that you are thinking about, or your child, if you're the parent of a late talker, is pretty connected to you, pretty agreeable as far as letting you dictate what you will do and what he or she will participate in with you. They're fine sharing that experience. That doesn't happen with all kids. And with the kids, again, there's a percentage of late talking children who also have some sensory processing or sensory regulation differences, meaning their little bodies keep them on go, go, go all the time. And some of our little friends who will go on to be diagnosed with autism certainly fall into this category. So for this kind of kid with therapy, you know that we should really do everything we can to set up the circumstances to make them more likely to want to connect with us and stay with us. And so the predictability of verbal routines can do that for children, particularly when there are receptive language issues, meaning that they aren't understanding lots of what they're hearing. Words still don't really make as much sense to them as we would expect for their age. And so this is another reason that when they hear a little verbal routine, you can see them perk up like, aha, I know this. I remember this. This is something that I'm familiar with. And again, it's not something a kid can tell you at this point, but if you start to read his little facial expressions and read his little body cues, you can start to see some of that. And again, we'll talk about that as we watch some therapy clips with some kids, some little friends of mine using some verbal routines. So I'm so excited to share this information with you. All right, so let's talk about when we would start here with a late talker. And so remember, we've talked about this whole podcast series, and I gave you a whole handout about this way back in show 422, which is the first part of this series called Imitation Matters, and we talked about why imitation is so important. And then the very end of that show, we reviewed all of the levels of imitation, and there were some questions so that you could decide for yourself for the child or children that you were working with where they are. And then we meet a child where he or she currently is, and that's the level that we start working. We don't work at the goal. So even if your goal is for a child to use words to communicate his wants and needs, that's way up here at level 7. So many of our little late talking friends are not there yet. They need to begin at easier, earlier developmental levels, which is what this whole podcast series has been about. But today we're just at the level under functional words. So we're right here at verbal routines. And again, kids could start here conceivably. You could get a child for therapy, a new referral, and he or she would be developmentally ready to start with verbal routines. And here's when I think a kid is ready for this. When a child is imitating other kinds of play sounds, so meaning the kinds of words that we just reviewed back in show 426. So when we talked about the strategies that we would use to teach a child to imitate easier, earlier vocalization, so play sounds, and again, those exclamatory words, those words that we say with an exclamation point at the end, like yay, or wow, or even something kind of disappointing or disappointed, like oh man, those kinds of things. Late talkers sometimes really pick up on those kinds of things, and again, usually pretty tied to context at this point. But when a kid is doing a lot of those things, you think, aha, verbal routines may be successful for him. He's telling me if he's got lots of those, and by lots I mean 10 or 12 different examples of animal sounds or car or truck or vehicle noises, any little kind of sound effect thing. When he has 10 or 12 of those, or 10 10 or 12 exclamatory words, then you know he's probably ready to move on and could do verbal routines. Another indicator that a kid would be ready to start here and work on verbal routines is when he or she has popped out a few words, but they're not really imitating any single words. So here they are telling you, I can do it. I can use a few words, but hey, I don't have enough structure yet. I don't have enough predictability yet, which is why I'm holding on to these few little core words, and this is all I can say. So for those kids, we know that the structure of verbal routines will probably be a fantastic idea. We will be able to increase their vocabulary by adding new words, and again, tied to these routines. But over time, the frequency with which we elicit the verbal routines, meaning we're going to do these over and over and over, I think about it as priming a little pump. We get their system so ready, and then they are ready to start to pop out and imitate more functional words that don't have to be so tied to context. And so again, it's a wonderful strategy for lots and lots of children. Okay, and another time that I really introduce verbal routines is when a child frequently avoids me or runs away from me. And so we talked about this way back in level 2 with imitating body movements and with communicative gestures, or if you have followed any of my work with the 11 pre-linguistic skills that all toddlers master before words emerge, you'll know that interacting and connecting with other people is just a foundational skill. And that's the reason that any of us would develop language. It would be to communicate with someone else, so that we have to have a set of symbols in our system, so that the other person understands that you can use, again, to share messages, share ideas, ask for things you need, respond to someone else's request, all of those kinds of pragmatic functions. And so again, we have to really think about that and think about how we can really apply this with the kids that we're working with here, and how we're really determining when verbal routines would be appropriate. And so again, when a kid is not connecting to me, I think he needs more structure, he needs more predictability. Words don't mean that much to him yet. This doesn't make sense yet. So I've got to connect with him on an emotional level, which again we do through our social games, because he begins to recognize that, feel more comfortable, feel more familiar. We're establishing that relationship. And then on top of that social game, we're saying the same things at the same time every time we play. And so that language is there and that structure is there. And so that helps the child, again, be able to start to share this experience with us and enjoy this experience with us. So verbal routines are tied in even from the beginning when we're working on establishing that social connection. So the point is, when they are there at those earlier developmental levels, they're probably not ready to begin to fill in those words yet, which is what we're going to be talking about today. How to get a kid to start to finish some of those little rhymes that you start and some of those little sayings that you use. You know, we always want him completing that last word of it, because that's how our brains learn, from the end to the beginning. And that's a process called backward chaining, and it works beautifully for verbal routines. We start the routine and then the kid finishes it. So those are the things we're going to be talking about. And so I gave you some indicators for when verbal routines would be a good starting point for kids. So now let's go back and that's kind of a summary of what we're going to be talking about. Let's go back and unpack all these points so you'll know exactly how to use verbal routines with your late talking clients, or if you're a parent, your own late talking child, to get these words going. All right, I love this routine or this level because here with verbal routines, it's so exciting because we start to hear real words and we start to think there is a light at the end of the tunnel. This kid is going to talk. I just know it. And so again, it gets us even more excited than we were back with level 4 and level 5 when we were starting to hear some of those exclamatory words. Verbal routines are kind of like that because now they are really plugging in to what you start to say. And in the beginning, verbal routines, like all of the other things that we've talked about throughout this approach, are imitated. But here's the phase where we start to really move toward more spontaneous language. where we expect a kid to imitate it for a while, and then we expect him to use that word spontaneously. But the great news is with verbal routines, that's a lot easier because we talked about that specific context, meaning that the first part of the phrase and the last word of the phrase, they're always the same. Nothing is changing in this. When we say ready, set, go, we always know that we want that last word to be go. So you can see how this would be moving a child toward that spontaneous use because, again, at the beginning he'll imitate it, but then he starts to fill it in when you are quiet and you let him just fill in that last little word of your blank there that you've done. So let's talk about what verbal routines are. I've already given you that example with Ready, Set, Go. They can be things you make up, and I have some verbal routines that I have just said over and over and over, and I guess that would be a verbal routine with the over and over and over. You get my point with that, right? But I have the same things that I have said lots of times over the years in therapy, and now they're just part of what I say with kids. So that would be a verbal routine because it doesn't matter who the kid is. If we're playing in the sandbox, if we're playing with baby dolls, or if we're playing with a puzzle that I've had for a long time or a really familiar book, I'm going to say the same things that have worked with other kids. And so that becomes my little script. And so they can be things that you just make up, which you might have some things like that if you're a therapist or a parent, or they can be well-established nursery rhymes, games, or songs. So think about this. An early verbal routine with a kid might be a patty cake, if we are letting the child fill in some of those words for patty cake. It might be Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Maybe that's a song that you have sung to a child since the day he was born, and then you get to this point and you start to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little. And you do your pausing and you do your expectant waiting, and what happens? He starts to fill in that word, which would be star. It might be with a little game like a Ring Around the Rosies, where we hold hands and we, sing Ring around the rosies, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. And again, that would be the end. We would want the child to say down. So that little game there, that would be a game we would play. Again, or any little song that you've used or could do, maybe Wheels on the Bus, maybe If You're Happy and You Know It, any little song. Like I did before with Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. So those kinds of things are also verbal routines because we say the same things in the same way at the same time. And so that same piece is what leads to that predictability so that a child learns what comes next. And here's what I said before. These words become automatic over time because, like we said, a child's little brain fills that word in. Now, experts who recommend verbal routines. So this is the evidence-based practice part of justifying why we would target verbal routines with late talkers. Dr. Rossetti uses verbal routines. He likes verbal routines or any kind of routine where a child remembers what's going to come next, and we embed those language strategies in context all day long. So kids first learn to understand words, and then they learn to use words. The teach method, which is structured teaching, and particularly established for children with autism or who are at risk for developing autism or being diagnosed with autism. And so that really specific treatment approach uses lots of verbal routines. They use a lot of visual routines too. And so again, helping children learn how to stay with a task and learn how to complete an activity from start to finish. So that's certainly one of the evidence-based practices that we use for kids who are on the autism spectrum. Giggle time is kind of an offshoot from floor time with Dr. Greenspan, and Susan Odd-Saunders, who is an educator, wrote this wonderful book, and when I read it, it really changed my life. I read it at the same time that I read Dr. Greenspan's first book with about treating autism, looking at children with their differences, and it really taught me how to think about social games, how to organize social games, and then how to teach parents how to do social games. And so my first therapy manual, Teach Me to Play With You, was an offshoot of that. And it's such an important piece of work, I think, in early intervention. And if you've not read that, that would certainly be worth your time to track that book down. And then Hannon, at hannon.org, all of their wonderful information talks about how important it is to establish these kinds of routines for late talkers. So let's talk about why verbal routines work. First of all, they're so appealing. That repetitiveness and predictability will be particularly appealing to all kids, and especially those that we've already mentioned that are on the autism spectrum. And all kids, though, let's start with that. All kids really benefit from verbal routines, and think about the most effective preschool and kindergarten and early elementary years teachers that you've known in your lifetime. But if you think about those, generally ladies, maybe some gentlemen, but think back to how they organized and ran their classrooms. I bet that they had lots and lots of verbal routines, meaning there were things that they said at the same time every day to cue the children in their classrooms, usually with what comes next. So there might be a washing your hands song, there might be a line up song, there might be a circle time song. And so teachers have used this for a long time because this is how young children learn. If you'll think about your most beloved books, children's books and children's movies and television programs, lots of times they're built around a song or built around several little songs that you sing or that are played throughout the entire show. And so those kinds of things really work. What about your own favorite songs? When I teach this course live, I'm usually doing this part, after lunch when everybody's, we're all a little looser about that time of day. But I ask about, just the power of songs. And I say, think back to, anytime when you hear a song and it automatically makes you remember the boy that you were in love with when you were 19 or something like that, because those songs can really trigger that deep memory and those emotions. And again, they pull us in. And so that's why we need to use these verbal routines. It triggers that memory portion in our brain. So let's talk about prerequisites for verbal routines. I've already given you the starting point, but I want to remind you about time. The child has to have heard the routine often enough to recognize it, to remember it, and then he has to be verbal enough to be able to join in. And so that's going to take some time to come together. So don't be discouraged if you start some verbal routines and then it takes a few weeks for a kid to start to even seem like he's going to join in. That's okay. Some kids will be more ready for this than others. And again, if you have walked them through this entire process and they've already started to imitate some vocalizations in play with some sound effects or those exclamatory words, they're going to be developmentally ready for these verbal routines, and it should not be a complicated jump for them to make. But here's the problem. Sometimes we rush ahead anyway. We'll hear one or two little pop-outs with those little play sounds and we'll think, oh, he's ready. Let's jump right in with verbal routines. You still have to give a kid time. You still have to get all that listening in so that his or her little brain will begin to predict those words that come next. The second part is sometimes we just haven't gotten there yet with receptive language. So a child really doesn't understand what you are saying to them. And so that's going to make it really harder to jump in. Now, you might have some arguments with that. You might say, well, Laura, it's a song. Lots of typically developing kids process or just who are processing normally would not understand all the words in a song. And that's completely true. However, those kids are talking and they have separated and organized their little systems well enough that they can say those things and process those things without having to understand them. But we know that our little late talking friends are different, and that's more of a challenge for them. So again, sometimes they have to hear it even longer longer before they're going to be able to join in, even when they're already pretty verbal. Now, verbal routines are a strength for kids with echolalia. Now, what do I mean by echolalia? That means that a child echoes or repeats a lot of what he's heard many, many times, most of the time without understanding what it means. And so and that it's not directed toward anybody else. He's saying it because he likes to say it. It feels good to him. So there's some component of self-stimulatory verbalization there. So that kind of, you think, should I not be doing verbal routines with kids who are echolalic? Should I know that this is kind of a, they can already imitate, so why am I really working on that? And I get that, but I like verbal routines because there's, even for those kids with echolalia, because there's still a component of them sharing this with me. They're not off doing their own monologue or soliloquy. They're not over in the corner quoting, a whole scene from Toy Story 4. They are with me and they are saying what comes next, and it does become more interactive. So again, I like it for those kids even with echolalia, but when you're teaching them extra words like that we've got to back it up with comprehension, and we have to make it functional. All right, so let me give you some examples of verbal routines, and I've included these. They're on your handout, and remember, you can get that when you purchase CE credit with that link below here in the post on YouTube. So let me just give you some of these verbal routines. And remember, we're going to teach these by saying the same words over and over and over and over. And so sometimes parents will say, does that mean that I just have one play routine for one toy and then I pick another verbal routine for the next toy? No, you can interchange these. You can use these all day long. And you really don't want a child to get stuck with, we only say ready, set, go when we play with this racetrack, but with this racetrack we play 1, 2, 3. We say 1, 2, 3. Can you see how a kid might do some of that? No, you want him to generalize. So use these same routines, and I tell parents, just pick 2 or 3 at the beginning and use them when they make sense in context with a child so that you make this meaningful. I also tell parents you have to practice, but don't wear it out. Do you know what I mean by that? You want to do it over and over and over so that a kid gets it, but you don't want to make him just cringe when you start to use your verbal routine. And so many times, that doesn't mean that, you can do it a couple of dozen times a day, and that's not too much. But if you just hammer a kid with it, it might drive him away from you. So just wanted to mention that. So here's the big deal too. Remember what we said about how a kid finishes a verbal routine. We do the verbal routine. We do the whole thing. We say all the words for a while, and then after we think that he's recognizing it, and if he's verbal enough to join in, we pause right before the last word to see if he is ready to fill that in. So these examples, we've already said ready, set, go. We've already said we could do 1, 2, 3. One thing that I like to do instead of counting, and again, counting is a fine verbal routine, but for late talkers, sometimes we need to make these targets or what we want them to say, our goals for them, easier. So like with going up or down steps, when a parent would naturally count, why don't you say when you're going up the stairs, up, 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 or down the stairs, down, 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 or when you're swinging or jumping, instead of counting, which again, there's nothing wrong with that, but maybe pick a different word. When you're swinging, maybe say whee, or when you're jumping, you might say jump, 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 or go, 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 or whatever that you think that would work there. But don't get so tied into counting that that's all you do. And I've had parents do that a lot. You can use previous activities so that if a child, so that if a child really likes a game like row, row your boat, well, that would become a verbal routine. We would want them to complete the last little line there. Easy songs and finger plays are great, especially when you have sung them over and over and over. So I mentioned that example before with a little boy. If you had sung Twinkle, Twinkle every night of his life as part of his bedtime routine, that would be a great song to think about using a verbal routine, because you've already done the hard work. You've already put in the time. So think about those things. And remember, we're going to start the line, start the song, and then the important thing is what? We do the expectant waiting. And so I told you about that already. So do you remember what I said? How do we do that? All of our body language really conveys to that child that it's your turn to talk. And so you've got your tell me face on. I wish I'd made that up, but another SLP said that. You've got your tell me face on. Your eyes are wide. Your mouth might be open. You're leaning forward. And again, you're doing everything you can to look in that little child's face as if to say, it's your turn to talk. All right. So other kinds of things that other original verbal routines, just pick the keywords from the play routine that you're doing, and I'll tell you it's easier to go with the action or the verb or like an exclamatory word than it would be labeling. It's hard to drive a car and say car, 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 car. It's easier to drive the car and say, ready, set, go, or again, have a verbal routine where maybe you do ready, set, go, and then maybe the part that the child that you would do for a long time would be a car sound, like, something like that. And so after a while, that might be what you do. You do ready, set, go, let them fill in the word, and then hopefully you're even going to get that little sound. And so think about the things that you can do. If you have watched my DVDs, or maybe even some of the therapy clips that have been in this Building Verbal Imitation Skills in Late Talkers in this series, you'll notice that I put all of my toys in giant 2.5-gallon Ziploc bags. So because that's such a common routine for me, I have a verbal routine with that where, we talk about we're going to open, I show them the toy and I say, what are we going to do? What do we have to do? And we say, open. And then we put our fingers on the zipper. And then we say, 1, 2, 3, zip. And that really has become a word for lots of little friends that I've seen, especially when we do the routine in the winter, because their parents can practice as they zip up their little coats and jackets every day. And so just come up with those little things that you can do. And what you want to do is pick really familiar words, keep it real short and sweet, and you want to say the same things at the same time. You might already do some, like if you're playing with a dollhouse or a pretend farm or anything with a little door, I bet you knock on the door, knock, 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 and I bet you say open. Or maybe you have more of a pretend play kind of theme going where you might say, who is it? Or who's there, something. But those are verbal routines. And so pay attention to yourself, therapists and parents, over the next week when you're playing with your child. And when you lapse into your auto drive, your autopilot, just kind of take account of those things that you say automatically when you're playing, because those are your verbal routines. All right, so I want to show you a clip of a little girl that we've been using or our demo for typical development. And again, I've picked a child who was right around her first birthday, so you could always remember how easily and how early this whole process of imitation develops. This little girl wasn't saying very much at this point, but it's so awesome for you to see that she still had these prerequisite levels. And so that's the whole point here. Here I'm introducing a verbal routine with the baby doll. So watch this. Where's your baby? Baby! There's the baby. Oh, can we pat her? Can you pat your baby? Pat, 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 pat. Can you pat her? Will you pat her? Will you pat the baby? Pat, 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 pat. Pat that baby. That's right. You did it. Pat, 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 pat. Yay! You said it. Yay! I know. Can we pat the baby? Avery. Pat, 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 pat. You do it. Show Laura. You pat the baby. Pat, 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 pat. That's right. Yay! Hey. So with verbal routines, I would really encourage you to just be as original and creative as you can be, yet still keep it simple enough for a child to be able to imitate you. Now, one reason that I really like verbal routines is that it replaces lots of that mindless narration that we all do as pediatric therapists and even as parents of late talkers. You know, as a parent, you've heard the advice from speech language pathologists: talk to your child and any child development expert. So that's what we do. We talk. We talk and 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 we talk. And that's great because kids have to hear language and hear words before they can understand and use words. But on the flip side, sometimes with our late talkers, we never slow down enough or give them simple enough words or targets to imitate. And so when we use verbal routines, it really makes us more aware of that so that we can change the words that we are modeling and so that we can really think about it and be really intentional. Could he imitate me here if I said something that's easier? So think about that, especially like I said before, if you have the same kinds of things that you play with kids all the time, and you know as a therapist the things you play bubbles, you probably play some versions of games with blankets, peekaboo. You probably, whatever, where, whatever little game that you play with that. You probably always play cars. You probably always read books. You might have some water games that you play, especially if you see kids for home visits and you're trying to give parents some ideas with that. Just think about the things that you consistently do with kids. If you still carry a toy bag, this is a lot easier for you because you can just come up with some verbal routines for all your toys, really based on the things that the kids could do with the toy. And so think about that and get yourself some routines like that. And so what I mean by replacing that mindless narration, so instead of, say, the sandbox, maybe you have a sensory box that's made of sand and you play with that a lot. And so instead of saying, this is my sandbox, come play in the sandbox, don't you want to play with me with the sand? Let's get the shovel, let's get the bucket. All the silly things that we all do, you may really become so skilled at using this strategy that you're sitting down playing with the sandbox and you're going to hear yourself say the same thing over and over, something like, dig, 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 pour it in the bucket and dump. And then you do it again, dig, 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 pour in the bucket and dump, or whatever. Just make it up. I just made that up there. I probably might say dig, 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 dump, dig, 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 dump, whatever. It doesn't matter. And again, you want to match what's going on with the child. But you repeat yourself and you say those same things over and over and over. And can't you see, because you've made yourself more structured and more repetitive and more predictable, so that a child will be able to fill in that last word there. And so think about your play routines and come up with some things. And I want to show you some of my favorite routines with the toys that I use and with several of my little friends as we move through these next 3 therapy clips. And I want to show you what we can do to build a verbal routine around these things that happen with us. So around some toys, and then we'll take a look at the next kind of context. So let's talk about this first little guy. So this is my little friend, and we are playing with a toy called a flat ball. PHLAT. I'll go ahead and spell it for you because I always get emails and comments back. What's that great ball toy? It's called a flat ball, and it's in the Nerf toy section. And I use this little routine with everybody that I see when we play with this ball. So watch it. You'll hear me kind of talk about it and introduce it, and then we'll discuss it after you watch.
Yay! What should we play?
Oh, you want your ball?
Okay.
You want to push? Okay. Let's push. Here we go. Push. Push it. Oh, wait. Push. What do we say? Wait. Yay, ball. Yeah. I'll push. What do you say? Wait.
want your drink? Yeah, drink. Which one? Ball? Okay, ball. Push. Push. What are you going to do? Wait, 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 wait.
How'd you like that? That kind of structure is what a lot of kids need to be able to pop out a word. And did you hear him trying to fill in the last word? And you might say, I don't recall him saying anything at all. Go back and listen to it again. What did he do? He did the scream. He did the, when I'm clapping and saying, yay! He did that part. He didn't do the wait part, or the part before that where we're saying push to push the ball in. He didn't even say pop when the ball popped like I did, but he did say ah or ah, whatever we were saying, and I'm kind of matching that to yay. So that was his part. He did start to fill in that verbal routine. And so you want to do that with kids. You want to use the same toys and say those same things every single time. So get yourself some scripts, develop some scripts around those toys that you use. All right, then that was the first one. We can build a verbal routine around a toy. Now let's look at building a verbal routine around an action. Now with this toy, you are going, or action, we're playing with toys, but you're going to hear me use these action words, and I think these kinds of routines are so successful because parents can easily generalize these. This little guy started saying up, up, up when they went on their bunk beds. You could use that when you climbed the ladder at the playground. You could use it when you're jumping on the trampoline. You'll have to listen kind of to the things he says, or on the bed, anything like that. So listen to this and listen for this verbal routine.
So desperate for mommy. Look, we're going to make him climb up, 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 up. Ooh, Noah. That's right. Up, 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 up. Ooh, can your man do it? Up, man, up, up, yay. Can they jump? 1, 2, 3, jump down. Whoa. Jump down. Good job. Up, 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 uh-oh. Up, up, up. Up and down. 1, 2, 3. Jump down. Ooh. Up and down. Jump, 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 jump down.
Now let's talk about building a verbal routine around a game. Now this game that you're going to see in this next video clip is just one of my favorite all-time games for toddlers. And I love it because it's the night-night game. So pretending to go to sleep is something that lots and lots of toddlers think is hysterical. And it's just a familiar routine. And so kids know this and they anticipate it. And pretending to be asleep, again, is one of the very first kind of pretend play schemes that a kid does outside of using some props or some toys. And so I love this one because there's some gestures that we've incorporated, like putting your finger to your lips for shh. There's some sounds, little sound effects that we've incorporated when we're putting our head down and pretending to snore. And then we have the verbal routine here when we're counting 1, 2, 3, and then wake up with our words there at the end. So watch my little friend and pick out those pieces and start to think about how you can use the same routine with a little friend that you're working with. Hi, Julia, show me how to go to sleep. Do you want to play night-night? Oh, there we go. Night-night. Okay, let's count. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Wake up! You gotta do wake up. Did you say it? Wake up! Good, let's play it with baby. Let's do it with baby again. Are we ready? Oh, pat her. Can you pat her? Pat, pat, pat. Good. Tell her. Shh. Tell her. Shh. Say, Night-night, baby. Oh, is Julia going to sleep too? Oh, shh, we're playing night-night. We're playing night-night. Let's count so we can wake up. 1, 2, 3. Wake up! Yay! That was good. So how about that game? I just love that night-night game. And think about, again, I've cued you before you watch the video clip with thinking about how you could use that game with little friends. But again, look at how structured it is. It basically walks through this entire process that we've been working through with teaching a child how to imitate. We've got some toys there that I played with Julia. We were playing with some baby dolls there. So we had that so she could imitate some actions. If she wanted to do that, we could have had her what? We could have had her pat the baby doll or kiss the doll to put her down to go to sleep. We could have had her cover the doll. And again, almost all the time this game ends up, you start out thinking about it or talking about it with the baby, but it instantaneously switches to being fun for you and the child to play. But we could do some things there with imitating actions with objects. We have some body movements to imitate there. What did we say? We said that you could put your finger to your lips for shh when you're playing that. And what about at the end with raising their hand? So again, you might play this with the kid and your goal isn't for them to say the words yet or to even make the sound for shh, but you just want them copying the gestures, just imitating those gestures after you as you play the game together. And so then we move up to those vocalizations in play and exclamatory words. So we've already said, shh, which would be that great vocalization in play. We've done snoring there when we pretended like we were asleep. We've even done a level 3 action in that game. Can you think of what that was? That nonverbal action with your face and mouth? We closed our eyes to sleep. So we even had a level 3 thing there. So even if you're playing this with a kid that, you've been working on gestures, you think, how can I make this just a little bit more complicated? See if you can get him to close his eyes. And then again, pair those little gestures together and sequence those gestures. That would make that a lot harder. And then we are up to the verbal routine where we're counting 1, 2, 3. And of course, that little phrase there, wake up, which was just precious when she said that. So that was a way to think about, how can I match the skills that a child already has or is developing to this little game that he or she would be playing. And so you have to get pretty skilled with that, with looking at that and with thinking, oh, this is something he could do, or she likes this. She already does. Let's say with Row Row Your Boat, let's say that a kid really likes to rock and she likes to sit on your lap. She loves that closeness and she craves that body-on-body contact because it helps her settle down. And so you do a little game. You think, well, what can I do? What kind of game can I do to make that successful? Well, then you pick a game with some rocking and a game where she's sitting close to you and you find one that you can do, like Row Row Your Boat, where you're rocking together. Or maybe you do Humpty Dumpty, or This Is the Way the Gentlemen Ride, Gentlemen Ride, Gentlemen Ride. You know that little song where you put a kid on your lap and bounce like that, like the horses? So those little songs are so important, but your way to help a kid become verbal with these, it starts with you. And so you've just got to pick a few target words, a few short phrases that you'll use in the same way for the same activity every time you play. And remember what the author said that we talked about at the very beginning with the expert kind of review of who would recommend this. Remember what she said? She said this increases the staying power of a child, so that when we have kids who, again, want to run away from us because they really don't understand what's going on, and sometimes we don't even equate that with a language problem. We think it's a sensory issue. He just wants to get out of here. He doesn't like what I'm doing. So, again, sometimes we go to that behavior piece. He doesn't ever do anything I say, or whatever silly thing that we come up with, when lots of times it really is a receptive language problem. They can't process all those words you're using and they get overwhelmed, and it kicks them into fight, flight, or freeze. And so the flight part would be what? Where they try to get away from you. And so when we make our words, again, super simple, super repetitive and predictable, that's when we'll see more and more of those kids start to hang around with with us, and you start to see their little eyes twinkle because they get that recognition like, oh, I remember that. I know what happened last time we played this. This ended with you grabbing me and throwing me down on the floor and tickling me, or, that's just an example that would not appeal to every kid, but for some kids that's what they love. Or again, they start to recognize and they start to remember, oh, this ends well for me. I'm going to stick around here. She's going to throw me up in the air, or she's going to spin me around in this chair, or whatever little movement game we've come up with for that. Now, if you need some help with those verbal routines in the context of social games, my therapy manual, Teach Me to Play with You, is filled with those. And so get yourself a copy of that if you need to get some new ideas for that. And I'll post that link below. And the therapy manual that we're using for this whole series has some of these things too, back in the application chapter. So building verbal imitation skills in toddlers. And again, with this book, you get this great chart where you can walk through this whole approach like we've been using. All right, another big guideline that I want to make sure that you know about verbal routines is that you need to keep your words simple and predictable. So instead of singing, let's take a song like Old MacDonald. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on his farm he had a cow, E-I-E-I-O, with a moo-moo here. You know the song. You keep going with that, but it's pretty fast, lots of words, and then that sequencing for E-I-E-I-O, that's pretty hard for a late talker. So you might try to think, how he likes this song about the farm. I want to sing some songs about some animals because he likes it. That'll really capture his attention. And so you just come up with something more simple. And so my little version of this for a song like that would be Animals on the Farm. And so I would sing, cows on the farm say moo, 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 moo. The cows on the farm say moo, 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 all day long. All right, so I got through that with sort of staying on tune. And again, don't worry about it if you're not a great singer. Kids don't care. And a lot of our little guys with auditory sensitivities, are going to be covering their ears, and that's going to make you more self-conscious, but it's not you. That's just their auditory sensitivity with hearing singing voice. And so we have to help them normalize that. And so don't worry about that. Just keep singing. My point about this verbal routine, though, is that we made it simpler. What was our target word there? Do you remember way back before I started talking about kids who cover their ears? It was what? It was moo. So cows on the farm say moo, moo, moo. And we said it, let me count, about 9 times there, in that probably more like 12 by the time you get through that second line. And so can you see how you've made that a lot more predictable and a lot simpler for a child? And then you start to just pause like we talked about. Now, for you purists, you might be thinking, oh, she's going to pause at the end for the kid to say day. Well, you could do that, but really, where are we going to pause? We're going to pause for the kid to say moo right there. So we would sing, cows on the farm say moo, 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 moo. Cows on the farm say moo, moo. And then you've got kind of that anticipatory pause there where you're waiting for that kid to pause and moo, or for a kid to fill in moo with your pause. And so again, think about those things. Now I'm going to show you some examples with some songs that are easier to do. That's kind of hard because it still kind of is in the middle of that little phrase there, but kids do it. I mean, I have kids do it all the time. And so I want to just direct your attention to that for picking words that are simple and super predictable. Now books, you can do this with books too. So look at your favorite repetitive children's books. We're going to see a clip in just a second of my little friend. Let's go ahead and look at her. My little friend who came to see me from a different state, and she was a little friend who had one of those 3-day assessments. So this was on the second day or so when we're really, again, trying to get her warmed up. Her mom had used this system with building verbal imitation skills in toddlers. She had worked through this, and so she had said, I have her right here to level 6, to automatic speech. And so the primary focus of our visit was meeting her where she was and then seeing if we could get her pushed over that edge to use some more functional words. And let me give you a little bit of history with this little girl. She had some motor planning issues. Her diagnosis initially when she was an infant was failure to thrive, and then they found out that she had a neurological condition called Arnold-Chiari syndrome. And so again, that's sometimes we meet kids that we have no idea why they're not talking. We never know the reason, but sometimes we do, because kids are, because of their medical diagnosis, we know there's likely to be some communication delays here, and then they don't start to talk on time. And so we do our best in this situation, and as a parent and as a therapist, to get some strategies in place. But then even when those delays come, we try to find these treatment strategies that best address their delay. For this little girl, this approach worked beautifully because motor planning was hard for her. And again, what is motor planning? It's when your brain knows what you want to do or say, and you can send it to, if it's a motor a dyspraxia or apraxia or just a motor planning problem, it could be your hands or your whole body. But for suspected childhood apraxia of speech, which is, this little girl had a lot of markers for those, that's with your mouth. And so again, the word, your receptive language, that piece is there, you know what you want to say, you just can't get it there. And so this method really helps kids who are having that difficulty with motor planning. So let's watch this little girl, and we were using her just Brown Bear, so a predictable book here like we've been talking about, and you'll see that we're using a lot of gestures, so a lot of signs, and you'll start to see she's almost about to say that word. You'll even see her little lips go together. And so watch this progression as we work through that book there.
Looking at me. Good girl. Redbird, what do you see? Help me, push. I see a yellow duck looking at me. Oh, bye-bye, duck. Bye. Okay. Yellow duck, what do you see? I see a blue horse looking at me. Good job. You want to turn the page? Blue horse, what do you see? I see a green frog looking at me. Just gonna get the sign. Go get the sign, yeah. Turn page. Green frog, what do you see? I see a purple cat. Looking at me. Good job, Elsa. Good job. Ooh. Purple cat. What do you see? I see a white dog. Looking at me. Good job, Elsa. Turn the page. Good. White dog, what do you see? I see a black sheep. I usually do this for sheep.
Oh, okay, sheep.
It's really like you're shearing the wool.
Right, it's too hard, yeah, okay.
Oh, let's do it. I see a black sheep looking at me. Good job, Elsa. It's funny. Turn the page. Good. Black sheep, what do you see? That's right. I see a
Very good. Goldfish.
looking at me. Did you do it, Elsa? Yay! I see a goldfish looking Goldfish, goldfish, what do you see?
I should say Mommy.
Mommy, yeah, okay, that's right. I see a mommy looking at me. Do you see Mommy? There she is. Let's do it again. I see a mommy looking at me. Elsa, say me. You say me. Good. Good girl.
Now that little girl, you will also see her again in the next course, which is using functional words. But I wanted to set it up in this course so that you can see lots of times, again, we meet kids where they are, we put the strategy in place, but they still don't do it. They still don't do it on the first day, but sometimes it happens the next time you see them. So maybe that'll be a little tease for you, a little teaser there for you to want to see her in the next course. So let's talk about verbal routines here with troubleshooting. And like I just said, sometimes it doesn't happen right away. So you've got to slow down and give it some time and repeat, 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 so that a child has enough time to really learn the verbal routine. Another thing is sometimes we're not waiting long enough. So that expectant pause is just the and then you move right on. Sometimes with our late talkers, we have to give it a while. So go back and watch that previous clip with that little girl that I just showed you with that book. Her mom and I, we're so repetitive because the book is so repetitive, but we really wait. We cue her and give her some time. Now, do we wait so long that she has time to move on to something else? Absolutely not. And could we have waited longer than we did in the clip? Absolutely. But find that just right balance so that you keep a kid with you and keep them wanting to participate, but at the same time, you're not, again, losing them because there's so much time. They just have time to move on there and aren't even staying with you. So to troubleshoot verbal routines, we're going to simplify. So if you can't start to get a word or two, you just may have gone too complex. And so think about some simpler routines and some simpler words that you can do. Slow down. Oh my goodness, I probably should get that, just plastered all over every therapy room that I work in with just the sign slow down, because I am so fast still, even after all these years. And so lots of times we have to really, again, pull the reins back so that a kid has time to jump in there and we're not going too fast. And we talked about waiting expectantly and repeat, repeat, repeat. So verbal routines are such a powerful strategy that you can really structure your entire session around verbal routines, or at least a big portion of it. It's an excellent initial treatment strategy, like I said, for kids who are on the spectrum, who are a little bit verbal. They may be echolalic, but they just might be where they're popping out words, or maybe they're just using labels all the time, and they don't really use any words to communicate with anyone other than to respond or label when somebody says, "What's that?" Or even they're just labeling on their own and not really using words. So I love verbal routines because, like I said when we were talking about this earlier, the communication piece is built in. They have to say it. It's part of the routine. And again, usually it's directed to you. Usually you've got such nice joint attention in the context of the verbal routine. Now, what do I mean by joint attention? We haven't talked about that in this course, but it's where the child is focused on the same thing that you are focused on, and you are really sharing that. It's not that the kid is radar locked on it and you are just an innocent bystander over here, that he doesn't really, you're narrating, you're doing your part, but he has no idea that you're there. Doesn't care, never looks at you, never makes a sound, never does anything that's really in response to you or to acknowledge that you're there. And so when that happens, that hasn't been joint attention. Well, these little routines are fantastic for pulling kids in and helping them learn to use that joint attention. Okay, so I want to show you an example with a little guy that came to see me several years ago. And this is a little boy too that had some markers for autism. And so he was undiagnosed at this point, but watch how well he responded to verbal routines. Now, this was, again, a 3-day assessment. So on the first day, we played Ready, Set, Go a lot because I just knew this little guy was ready to use some words like that. And he had started to use some labels like we just talked about. He's just that perfect example of that, but he wasn't really using any words other than just to respond when his mom said, "What's that? What's that? What's that?" So we got some verbal routines going, and this is kind of a long clip, and you'll see some silly things happen in every real life therapy session, but you'll hear me talk to the mom about verbal routines. Watch her face because she was so excited that he was using some new words and really connecting with me as a new person and really staying with us. And so I love this therapy clip with verbal routines. And so you watch for how you can use this with your own child or a little friend on your own caseload.
Set. Go. Ring around the rosies, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Up, tell mama, up. And what do you say? Ready, set, go! Ring around the rosies, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down! It's not as hard to get him to go down today. Yeah, that's He's learning. Yeah. Up, tell mama, up. Say it, say up, up. Say up. Hands. Ready, set, go! Ring around the rosies, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down! This time we're going to pause to see if he'll say down. Because I think he will. Oh, good. I think he will. Let's see. Clayton. Hands. Ready, set, go! Ring around the rosies, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down! I told you. Up. Hands. Ready, set, go! Ring around the rosies, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down! Yay! Up. Hold hands. Up. Oh, are you all done? Are you all done or you want more? Want some more? Ready? Come on. Set. You just want mine? Rosies. Okay. Oh, rosies. Ring around the rose. Are you all done? Look, let's play horsey. Can we play horsey? Ooh. You want to ride a little horsey? Do it on mama. Get your legs out, Anne-Marie. Okay. Put your legs down. Do it on you. Turn around and face you. Look, you're going to play with mama. Mama. All right. Get your feet ready. All right, here we go. Ride a little horsey to town. Watch out, Clayton. Don't fall down. Let me go over here. Okay. Let's ride mama. PG-14. Oh, it happens to me all day. I'm here, everywhere. They got to put the bloopers on. All right. That little game.
I was walking.
Okay, good.
When you said that.
Well, Ride a little horsey is a good game to do on the floor. Row, row your boat is a good game to do on the floor. And when he'll come back over here, I'll show you how I sing that second verse, because he's going to like it. There's a scream at the end, and I think he'll like it. Here's the deal with him today, Anne-Marie. He's finishing all of these, what we call verbal routines. If he's heard it enough, he's going to want to do it. Oh, let's row, row your boat. Ready? Let's row, row. Oh, you ready? Set, go. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Clayton, if you see an alligator, close your eyes and scream. Ah! Whoa! More. Row, row. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Ooh! Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Clayton, if you see an alligator, close your eyes and scream. Ah! Whoa! If you see an alligator, close your eyes and scream.
So that was a pretty long clip, but that's what you can do with verbal routines. You can string them together and keep a kid with you who would normally want to run away and do his own thing. And so again, that's why I love verbal routines. If you need some help with those, you can get them in my therapy manual, Teach Me to Play With You. There are tons of those little games, and there's a whole chapter about verbal routines here in my book, Building Verbal Imitation Skills in Late Talkers. And look where we are. We're all the way up to level 6. What comes next is real words. So if you have been with me through this entire course, we are now finally ready to talk about how to teach a child to imitate real words. But I hope that you'll consider all the things that a child has learned through this point. We've taught him to imitate out here with actions with objects, and then we moved on up so that he's using some body movements and even some communicative gestures to begin to send messages to us. Then we moved that imitation up to his mouth, where we even started with some non-verbal, non-vocal mouth and face movements. Then we talked about those 2 fun levels, play sounds and exclamatory words. And then in this show, we just talked about verbal routines, which would be using words that are just tied to that really specific context. When kids develop several routines like this, and when you can have them popping out little words to say 10 or 12 little routines, then, in my opinion, they are ready to move on to the information that we're going to talk about in the next course. So if you are ready and the kid is ready, I will see you over there, and we'll continue to talk about teaching late talkers to imitate. All right, so that's all for today. I'm Laura Mize, pediatric speech language pathologist, and thank you so much for joining me for Teach Me to Talk's podcast.